Alright, so the other morning, it's 3:45 in the morning, and I had just woken up, and it's way too early to be up for the day, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to lay here and try to go back to sleep. But as I was laying there, I started to think about God and hell. The concept and idea of hell came into my mind, and God started talking to me about hell and why it's there and why people go to hell. So I'm laying here having all these thoughts like, okay, God's talking to me about hell right now when I'm trying to sleep, but he had other plans. And the thing about God is he's really cool, and he reveals stuff to you that I'm not smart enough to figure out on my own. It truly comes from him putting this in my mind because I hadn't thought of it this way before. But as I was laying there with my eyes closed trying to go to sleep, I was thinking about the phrase I've heard from people that is, why does God send us to hell? If he's loving and he cares about us, why does he send us to hell? And that was going through my mind. Like, what's the answer to that? Why, God, would you send people to hell? And he's like, I'll tell you why. And then he popped a thought into my head that said, hell was not made for you guys. It wasn't made for people. I made people out of love and to love me. Hell was made for the devil. He reminded me that, and I was like, oh yeah, hell was made for the devil. And I didn't even think about this verse because either, I must have forgotten it because I've read Matthew before, but it's how God works. He reminds you of stuff. Then I looked and I found the verse that said, Matthew chapter 25, verse 41. 25:41. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. The eternal fire, he's talking about hell. He's talking about the departure of Satan from him into hell, which was prepared for the devil. He says that in that verse. It was prepared for Satan and his angels. Well, they're demons now because they fell. But Satan and his demons all started out as angels. But God created hell for them because they turned their back on God. And heaven is a place without sin. Heaven is pure. Heaven is where God dwells. And so you can't have sin and perfection and God dwell in the same place. So Satan was kicked out of there. And in Luke 10:18, Jesus, he replied, being Jesus, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So that verse tells us that Satan was kicked out of heaven. Hell was created for him. So this keeps snowballing, right? Hell was created for Satan. So why would we go there then if it wasn't created for us? And then this is the really cool part that God reminded me, because he's like, okay, think about who I am, right? The really interesting thing about the Bible is God says that he loves us and he is merciful and he gives us grace and all the good things that he does for us. But he tells us that he doesn't just do those things, but that he is those things. And this seemed really important in my mind because God says, I am the light. He doesn't just say, I have light. He says, I am the light. And he also says, I am love. So that would mean the separation of God would be separation of the things God is. We can choose not to follow God and separate ourselves from Him. He gave us that choice. So if we're separate from God, and God is the light, and He is love, and He is truth, those things cannot exist separate from Him. Which means hell cannot have light, it cannot have love, it cannot have truth. So here is where that all makes sense together and where He wrapped it up for me. If you choose not to have me, you choose hell, where there's darkness, where there's hatred, where there's weeping. Because if you are not with me, you are not with who I am, which is love, light, all the things that God is and tells us that He is, not just has, but that He is. So if we're not with Him, we can't have those things. So we have and go where Satan does, which is hell, because we cannot reject God, but then still have the things God is. We tell God, no, I don't want you. I don't believe you. I don't believe in you. I don't believe the Bible. And He gives us that choice. So hell is the separation of God. You separated yourself from Him and the things that He is. And that's why hell is the way that it is, because God doesn't dwell there. And God is those things, those nice, lovely things that we want to have. But we have those things because God exists and because He is those things and He's good. So the whole thing, when God said, I don't just have these things, I am these things. And that's why hell is this way, and why people send themselves to hell, because they choose rejection of God, which is what Satan did. Which maybe sounds to you like, okay, that's a really simple concept, but it was kind of mind-blowing to me laying there like, ooh, this, really crazy how God works like that. Anyway, so God could have chosen, okay, so Satan as his angel, right? Satan disobeyed God. He wanted to be everything God was, but wasn't himself. He was cast into hell. Okay, well, we were born with sin, and the devil sinned. God could have cast us into hell as well because of our sin. But he gave us this place called earth. He gave us this time that we have on the earth to make our decision. He let us make a decision. Okay, I can decide to go to hell, or I can decide to go to heaven. That's what life is about right now. It's not about all the things that we want, all the feelings we want to feel, because those are just dust in the wind. Our purpose right now is to decide where we want to go, because God's given us that choice by sending His Son to die on the cross. Now, He didn't just send Him. He didn't just force Christ to die on the cross. Christ willingly did so for us. And that's what I wanted to share with you. I mean, I feel like if He kept me awake to tell me about all that stuff, that it's important. And maybe it would blow somebody else's mind like it did. But man, when God says, I am, good stuff.